a few days after this class is over. Last number of years, ever since the beginning of the school, we go right up until the end, and we have classes, and you can imagine, we would have class on Friday, and then have final exam, and there are several pressures that are there. One pressure is on the staff to try and the grading, to get all of your grades for the whole year, including the class that just finishes at, say, 2 o'clock after we grade the test on a Friday, and then try and have it ready for Saturday graduation. In the old days, we used to have graduation on Sunday, so that gave a little bit extra time, but you can imagine trying to scramble to get to all your cumulatives, and then do all the certificates, very nice graduation diploma, and to try and have all the honors given is quite a task. So the one reason we've made the changes for the staff to help them accomplish all of that. And the second reason is because we cover a lot of material in these last 2 weeks. We don't sort of dump it all on you during the year or the beginning of the year and then just slough off to the easy stuff at the end. We're building crescendo here to conclude our year together. So you can imagine trying to finish high point material the last 2 weeks in apologetics, how to defend our faith to the lost and pagan world around us, and bring the year together, and then end class at 2 o'clock on a Friday and have graduation the next morning, the next day. You're emotionally not quite ready for that. We're not emotionally ready for that. And you don't have any downtime to really ponder, etc. So we've restructured the year this year, as you see in your schedule. And there's a week in between our last day of apologetics and graduation. Well, that's not dead space. You'll be doing some fun things, getting ready for graduation, etc. It will be a lot more relaxed. But we're going to take a number of days to do some work from the scriptures and from work and tying this together a little bit more too. So that's what we'll be doing then the next week. Okay. You have another assignment for next week. Quite a few of you gave reports this week, so I'm assuming there aren't a whole lot of oral reports next week. Most of it will be written work. Written work, you'll all be dealing with the same ism, and that is postmodernism. That is where we are today as a culture. Caveat slash a new extension of postmodernism. And we'll describe that for you next week. We'll have time to get into this issue of virtual reality and how we use that word to define what's happening in postmodernism. I'm handing out these documents here, and we'll have 2 more today. Gave it to Derek there. I want him to see if Tim can get those ready, or Rachel for us, and we'll have those for you by the end of the day, so you have some reading over the weekend. There's about 12 and a half, equivalent of 12 and a half pages of material. But it's good stuff, and I think it will be helpful as we go through this together. The Reaching the Happy Pagan by Rabbi Zacharias is, I think, a very excellent document. He has several points in there that we have already touched on, and want to draw your attention to those. Do you have those with you today? Do you have all your documentation with you? Let's pull that out real quick. Let's pull that out. There are, there's a number, there's almost so much here that I'm tempted just to go through the entire document, but for this morning we won't do that. What I want you to do is just go to his conclusion. And we're going to go to page, one section of page 6 of the 9. Page 6 of the 9, there's a heading there that says, how does the church reach someone whose very framework or grid doesn't allow any common ground? I take it to what he's meaning here, to mean that we're dealing with in this postmodern mindset, and he talks in this document about postmodernism, doesn't he? The world in which we live today. that it really is alien. So alien that it's difficult for older people like myself to grasp it and understand it because it's so different, diametrically opposed. As Schaefer pointed out in our video, for centuries, mankind has been looking for a unified structure in thinking. Actually, put it a different way from your class with Brad Belcher, mankind for more than centuries, for millennia, has been looking for unification in a philosophy that would bring everything together. And what do we mean by that? That there would be a system of living, a way of living that comes from a way of thinking that would bring value, purpose, satisfaction, and fulfillment to our lives. There is this longing that we have. That longing is an extension or a result or an evidence of the fact that we left God in the garden and we're trying to be on our own and we cannot fulfill our own wantings and desires. So philosophy, an intellectual pursuit, in a strict sense of the word, philosophy, an intellectual pursuit to try and find this unity, this oneness. And mankind couldn't find it. Schaefer points that out. And we've entered a very strange period of human history which is opposite what mankind has been doing all this time, to use reason and logic and discussion and pursuit of information to try and grasp how to have this unity in our lives. Two subsets real quick on the thoughts on this unity thing. If you remember, during the Middle Ages, there were alchemists, or alchemists is the way I believe to pronounce it. And alchemists were like wizards, and you see them in Disney movies, like Merlin, the magician, in Fantasia. Alchemists were a group of people who thought that they could find elixirs. They thought that they could find specifically something that would turn something common into something valuable. For example, gold. They were trying to find how to make gold. Now, in our culture today, in our intelligence today, we know that there are elements, and they're created elements, and they have to do with the makeup of atoms and elements within there that they're constructed that way. We can make in chemistry certain things and mix things together to have compounds, but there are basic elements that we work with. Well, people didn't necessarily know all that, so it would have been reasonable to assume that gold is something else coming together, a compound of something. Well, wouldn't you be able to learn how to make gold from water, for example, and take something common and then make gold? So alchemists tried to find that, and they tried to find out what could dissolve everything. We know that water is that compound, isn't it, that seems to be able to break down. And I'm not a chemist, so I'm not going to go any further than that and show any ignorance here. But what you see in that area of quote-unquote science during the Middle Ages was a desire to find something common, to find something that was unifying, that would bring everything together, that would help make sense of everything. So that, I think, I just show you that because I believe that in alchemy is an extension of this general wanting to try and find meaning and purpose in life. And we're still trying to do that. Now, Schaefer points out that mankind came to a point where reason and logic wasn't working. Men kept crossing out some previous man's philosophy. I like to add that the average person in the pew, the average human being, isn't sitting there contemplating mentally how to find unity in his worldview. But we are the human race. We're trying to find that. And we read people and we listen to people. And artists and thinkers. Now think about yesterday's video. Painters, musicians, writers, playwrights often write their worldview. So the music is fragmented now and has been fragmented for some time. Articles and poetry has been fragmented. Art is fragmented in first Impressionism and then going into modern art. And Schaefer did an outstanding job showing us how that all then comes apart and we become fragmented ourselves. Our lives are fragmented. Well, there's so much to say here. I was just going to take one short bunny trail. If you see our culture today, for example, there is so much knowledge today, so much information. I remember about 30 years ago, I heard that we were adding 20 pages of new information to the body of information that human beings have to work with every single day. That was 20 or 30 years ago. I have no way of even making a guess today, and I have not heard anybody say how much information there is. How much information there is today. Think of how much new things are being discovered every single day. How could you possibly know and stay with that and grasp that? There were intellectual people and there was a lot of information when I was growing up as a child, but it's a J curve. You know what a J curve is? It's exponential. You start at this point and it doesn't go like this. The amount of information in human beings doesn't go on a steady grade like that. Even our culture doesn't go on a steady grade like that. It goes like this. There's a slow, ever increasing increase. It's going uphill, but then all of a sudden it takes off, and it's exponential, and it's almost impossible to keep up with it. Culturally, in the area of inventions, for example, the science of inventions, you only have to go back. Here it is, 2016. You only have to go back about 100 years or less. Now remember, when I first started teaching some of these things and talking about some of these things, and others talked ahead of me, of course, I'm a gleaner. That was when we moved here to Jackson. It was 48 years ago. When I came out of college, it was 50, 60, I don't even want to think about it, how many years ago it was. So much has been added since then. Since then, there were no personal computers. There were no cell phones at all. None. All you had was a landline in your house. That was not very long ago. And if you look at this J curve, you go back about 100 years. Somebody could do some research on it because now another decade has passed. And I've been using this illustration for a while. For the first 6,000 years of human history, the only way to get around, the only conveyance we had was walking or riding a horse or mule or donkey and a cart. Think about that. Talk about a J curve. Talk about a J curve. And you and I, 2016, only have to go back a little piece of human history. What is 100 years of 6,000 years? We only go back a very short span of human history, and everyone was burning oil to see at night. There was no electricity, no internet, of course, no planes, no automobiles, no gasoline engine, no steam engine, no railroads. For this vast section of human history was cart and donkey. Okay? Pretty amazing. Now we're not going to speculate of what man was like before the flood, because we do sometimes think that maybe they had some conveyances there that would blow us away if we understood how intelligent they were. But when we do this curve, we've got this J curve, we've got this exponential thing. So much information. Daniel, I believe, refers to this. Did Ben Ware go over this verse with you in the book of Daniel, where I think Daniel refers to this? Let me just take time. See, we have those extra 3 days, so there's some things we can do here that we couldn't do before. And one of them is these little sub-lectures that I'm giving you to try and help make sense of all this. Daniel, 12th chapter. Maybe I'm not in the 12th chapter. You're going to have to help me look here for it. 11th or 12th chapter. Daniel takes and gives us this idea of the explosion of information. I'll read through this 12th chapter. I didn't put this in my notes for this morning, so.
Isn't it in verse 4 where it says knowledge will increase?
Yes. Where are we?
12
Verse 4.
Verse 3, actually.
Verse 3. All right, thank you. Verse 2 and verse 3, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, those to disgrace and everlasting contempt. Those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of heaven, and those who lead many to race just like the stars forever and ever. That's a reference to the end times. So Daniel's concluding his prophecies here by getting all the way to the end. Then verse 4, but as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. Many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase. It's pretty amazing. Knowledge will increase. Earlier, I believe it is in the book of Daniel, that he talks about chariots with fire on them. And there are some who speculate that maybe he's even referring to things like the automobile, which has headlights on it. I don't know if we can take prophecy and do that. I think we want to be careful, because there was nothing in the context of whom was said when it was said to understand it. That, of course, is the nature of prophecy, isn't it, also? But here Daniel's talking about this knowledge increasing, and when we have that today, one of the reasons we had practitioners, medical practitioners, doctors, normal doctors, general practitioners when I was growing up, is because there was a growing body of information about the eye and the nose and the throat and the arms and different parts of the body. And then as information increases, men and women have to specialize to become up to speed on those particular sciences, those particular disciplines within medicine. 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, back to the early days of America, they were still bloodletting. Washington went through a bloodletting experience, didn't they? Using leeches, because they thought the blood had the poisons in it, and they had to get the poisons out of the blood. They were actually help killing people. How far back was that? That wasn't that far back. So with the increase of knowledge, there has to come the increase of specialization. With the increase of specialization, you actually have, it is good, it's good, I think it's wonderful that you have so many doctors, for example, in the medical profession, have such incredible knowledge concerning specific areas. But there is also a negative. The negative is, now listen carefully to this, because this is part of our educational understanding here at Jacksonville Bible College. You may disagree with me when I say this to you. I've already hinted it, I've already said it in different ways during the year. With extreme specialization, then, you have incredible expertise in the minutiae. Okay? Medical doctors today wanting to write a book, or someone philosophically wanting to get their doctorate, for example, in theology. A doctor doesn't do his doctorate on everything about the human body. That's not very common, is it, today? He gets his doctorate in the iris of the eye. In other words, today, doctorates almost always focus on extreme particular. You understand what I'm saying? Let this sink in a little bit. Let it sink in. You have studied these isms and these names that you can hardly pronounce of these different, some European, etc., who got into philosophy and religion and existentialism. And you see, they focused so completely on that particular issue, almost like the reformers focused so much on soteriology, that they lost perspective of the larger picture. Not because they wanted to, not because they were ignorant, they're extremely intelligent, but because they simply didn't have time to look at the broader image. When Ellen went for cancer treatment with my sister-in-law to Salt Lake City, she was seeing 2 doctors there. And then at one point, the doctors in this oncology hospital, for her and the other patients, but they did it for her too, there were 9 disciplines, 9 different doctors who would come together every 2 weeks, and they'd get her file out and they would review her case. 9 doctors. My brother was a bit confused and irritated and frustrated. I think, oh, maybe that's overextending it. I was, and so was my wife. Because she was down there for treatment, and her specialist would say, here's what you need to do. And the other specialist would say, no, I think we should do this. Why? Because the doctors were so extremely intelligent and schooled and educated on the particulars of one particular aspect of her cancer or her body that they focused on that. So they understand this. Doctors understand this. They're not stupid. So what they did is, in this hospital, and they do it in this hospital, they would take doctors from 9 different areas to review her case. Okay? 50 years ago, one doctor would review his case because there wasn't that much information about cancer, and he was maybe an oncologist specialist on cancer. But now there are so many kinds of cancers. Well, there were many kinds of cancers 100 years ago. Okay? But now we specialize. And because of this is wonderful because we have such incredible depth and of understanding of treatment. But what's the danger? Seeing the big picture, something being missed. The implication of this factor with this factor over here. And so it has happened also in the arena of philosophy and somewhat the arena of religion, Christianity. Someone will go to school, and if you want to get your doctorate, which is the highest level you can get, then you go for a second or third or fourth doctorate. What is one of the key things you need to get for a doctorate? You need to pick a subject and do a dissertation. You need to spend a lot of time, and whenever you talk to somebody that's got their doctorate, their eyes roll, because it's not that you're just going to write a paper or a theme paper, or you're going to write a term paper at the end of the term, like you're doing these small papers we have you write, and you're going to write a 3-page double-spaced paper on some subject. A dissertation almost always includes the idea that you're going to research something that no one else has ever researched. And you're going to do it in such depth that you're going to disclose and find something unusual that will come to the body of knowledge of the human race in that area. Okay? So, do you know someone that's done their doctorate work? It's overwhelming at times for them, if they take it serious. Because what they're really, and they have an advisor that they go to at the university or seminary where they're attending, and that person helps walk them through this process. And then they present their paper, their dissertation, and then it goes through a process and approved, and then they have their doctorate. It's wonderful, because then we have men and women spending an incredible amount of time looking at details because of the vast information of our God, who is infinite in wisdom and understanding. So there's no limit to how much you can pursue a doctorate, is there? Because there's always something we don't know. But now look at the negative side. The negative side is this person looks at the detail so much that he doesn't see the big picture. In fact, I like to be coy about this and maybe a little subtle and sarcastic. But if you saw this board as representing the composite mass of all information available to the human race, how much data would be on this board? You want to get your doctorate in the area of medicine or in the area of philosophy or in the area of some science, chemistry, or whatever it is, you want to get your doctorate in that. And this is especially true, I believe, in the speculative sciences, sociology, for example, or theology, areas that are ethereal, where we're getting into the area of God, where we just don't know much, because He's God and infinite and we're not. Then the point is, the more you focus on the smaller dot, the more potential there is to discover something in meaning and purpose that will astound others. If you write your doctorate on gravity and all you do is restate what Newton said, it's not going to be a very deep paper, is it? It's not going to be seen that way. One of the neat things about Genius of Ancient Man, and I don't want to claim intelligence on this or for our team either, but one of the things that came out of our teaching here at the college to see the big picture and presuppositional thinking, which we didn't invent at all, was an ancient man to go back and show that if in presuppositional thinking, if God created man, then early man would be intelligent. If early man was intelligent because he was in the image of God, then it would stand to reason, if we go back into history, we're going to find extremely intelligent things that men did. Now, we didn't come up with that, but we did popularize enough of that so that our publisher, who is finite too, they thought that was pretty amazing. And this idea that God started and originated everything, and everything goes back to Him, and so who invented human sacrifice? God did. Where the normal church person, I just shared that just recently with someone, and their eyes, it took them a while I'm explaining it to them to even grasp what I was saying, because they were Christians, but they assumed that, hey, pagans invented human sacrifice. That sounds horrible, human sacrifice. And when I had to quote the scripture to prove to this man that God invented it from the foundation of the world, before the foundation of the world. The plan was for Christ to die for us. God was going to send His Son. He's going to become a man and then die for us. God invented human sacrifice. Well, when we shared that with the editors at the New Leaf Press, you could just see that something new was hitting them that they had never thought about before. That's what makes an interesting book. Okay? That's what makes a doctorate treatise interesting. Somebody proposes something and shows some innuendo, some extra thing that somebody else hasn't talked about before. Now, I don't believe there's anything new under the sun, and I think it's very dangerous. Somebody say, here's something new. Actually, what we say in our book is we're really going back to something old, something that's always been there. Okay, we're just simply trying to point that out. So the danger is you focus on the minutia, and the more our culture focuses on the minutia, the more they miss the overall picture. So we have doctorates coming out, of our ears. America is packed with doctorates, and we still don't know how to do simple things, and we still haven't found this unity that I'm talking about. Then we come to a point where we can't find it through reason and logic, and there's still some trying to do that, of course. And then there are those that come along and say, where we're really going to find meaning is in meaninglessness, like Derrida, who is the philosopher of meaninglessness. That there is no meaning. And in non-meaning, then we can find meaning, having not been able to find it over here. Now, what this causes is a fragmented world. It's a fragmented way of thinking, because truth is now whatever you want it to be. Now, no longer are we trying to find common ground in truth. There is no common ground. I have no common ground with a postmodern mind, because our starting points are completely opposite each other. In the old days, we were all, as humans, including unsaved people, basically trying to find common. We're starting at certain points with common understanding, right and wrong, absolutes, and we were trying to find common ground. We were positioning Christianity as the answer to that unity. Now we're trying to present Christianity to a mindset that says there isn't any unity. There is no unity. There is only disunity. And that is a great challenge, isn't it? And we're going to really spend time on this next week, because the question I will raise for you is this. After we describe more and more and more what it is like to have a postmodern mindset, and Ravi will help us do that too. As we do that, then the question is, how do you take an objective, right and wrong, black and white gospel and present it to a mind that is totally alien to the mindset we come from? And we'll show you how the church has tried to handle that and how the church has failed, and we'll give you some illustrations of that in the future. Here's his statement. How does the church reach someone whose very framework or grid doesn't allow any common ground? There is no doubt the task is very difficult, but opportunities are unprecedented. So it does sound like a contradictory statement, doesn't it? For example, being present in the passage of life, the church will meets people in the transition points. Marriage breaks down, children commit suicide, and leave helpless parents. Death and suffering are everywhere. What he's saying is that while people have adopted, a culture has adopted. Now, in the West, this postmodernism. We're going to show you this later. Ravi will really help us on this. Postmodernism in the West now is throwing away, as Schaeffer says, rational thought, trying to find meaning in non-reason. Schaeffer's already pointed out to us that the East has been doing this for a long time. So this didn't start 40 years ago. And one of you in your report, who mentioned in your report either and or both and or either or, the law of non-contradiction, deals with this very subject. So in the East, that is in India and in China and in parts of Asia, it has been centuries of thinking of both and. And they try and make sense out of the non-unity by making unity out of the non-unity, if that makes sense. Okay? Now, Schaeffer is saying, Ravi here is saying, it looks hopeless. Well, I'm going to give you the ultimate reason it's not hopeless next week. The ultimate reason it's not hopeless, to try and take an objective gospel to a non-objective world, a subjective world. But he's got a good point here. There are crossing points because we're still dealing with human beings. You remember in the video yesterday that these men who painted Impressionist art and the men who painted modern art, when it came to painting their wives or their children, didn't paint them that way because it didn't fit the world in which they lived. And Bergman is playing Bach in the background, and he talks about the tension with what he's trying to say. He's trying to preach a message of disunity and fragmentation, when at the same time he realizes the music he's playing came from a different mindset of a different artist. Because they're real human beings. And the evolutionist in Teton or Yellowstone National Park who is preaching and teaching that bugs are okay and fire is okay and you can't discern between good and evil in the parks because there is no such thing and because it's all natural, whatever is natural equals good. When his child gets sick, he does not use that approach. He takes his kid to the hospital and the doctor says, well, we'll just see what happens here. And then the man says, nonsense, I'm going to another doctor. I want to know somebody who knows something about mumps or measles or whatever this is my kid has, and I want a cure. I want absolutes. I want help. Because he can't live that way. And so that's what Ravi is saying here. There are people that die, and kids commit suicide, and people are helpless. And it's at that moment in someone's life that they are vulnerable and open to the gospel. And he goes on then to describe, is it legitimate to meet a person through their felt needs? Is that legitimate? Do we just do it intellectually to present the gospel? And his answer is no, yes, it is legitimate. No, we just don't give the gospel intellectually to people. We can meet their needs by saying that Christ actually, and then he goes on to describe it, that Christ actually did meet real human needs. And so while the world as a group is rushing past us to oblivion, the group is made up of individuals who have heartfelt needs. And yesterday, and in this document too, we're going to have this emphasis over and over. That's why the first part of our verse, to sanctify the Lord in our hearts. And the last part of our verse, in humbleness and meekness, talks about where we are in coming first to ourselves and to our God before we start trying to reach out to the world. Because we need compassion. And Ravi in this document, as you read through it, will speak over and over of the need to have his heart right and to have right motives when he's talking to people. The person that he talks about, for example, I think it was in his document here, where somebody was, talking with him, there seems to be an argument and they're asking hard questions, and then he sees that their child is Down syndrome. Then all of a sudden he realizes they're asking this question about evil. How can there be evil? because it's firsthand. It's firsthand. They're looking at their child and wondering, why did this happen to our child? And see, if we lose sight of this, we think everybody's working in this ethereal, intellectual cloud up here. And that's not true. People are down here. They're in the real gruts. In the old days, the gruts was out in the outfield. Nobody wanted to play in the outfield. It was out in the gruts. That was a slang term back home. I have no idea what it means, but it means out in the outfield. To be out in the boonies, you know what that means. And down here in real life where the rubber meets the road. I do like how he wraps this up. He talks to pastors here. Now, you may not think you're a pastor, but we're all ministers and pastors in this archway. What do you think the primary role, in page 7, of the preacher is in today's postmodern world? The task of the preacher is undoubtedly one of the most difficult roles in a fragmented society, steeped in such a scorching secularism. Many people in the pew see Christianity as disjointed from their day-to-day life. Can I pause here? To some extent, I'm jumping ahead, but we'll give you this and repeat it so we can gain more and more information, because I still need more and more information. I'm not comfortable yet. I don't know if I'll ever be comfortable trying to understand this thing and how to reach our pagan world around us in a postmodern mindset. People are fragmented. After one of our classes one year, our students graduated, and the student came back. It was sometime later. She actually taught in our Christian school for a while. After she left the college here, she got a job. We hired her, and she was teaching in our Christian school here. And then she went to California, and then she came back to visit. And one day she came up to me on this visit and said, she was confessing and admitting to me, said, Pastor Don, I have to admit to you that it took her over a year after leaving the school to come to this understanding. We were teaching it, but for her to grasp it. She said, I have to admit to you that I was living in two different worlds. Now, Ravi's going to define this next week. Now, here's one of my students who takes over, I think it was over a year, to where it sunk in for her. Things that we were saying clearly here in the classroom. Ravi will say it clearly. People live fragmented worlds. So, the guy I told you about can be teaching Bible studies. He's a youth director in a church. Actual illustration I gave you last week, or whenever it was I gave you in the beginning of this week. Who knows when it was anymore now. Where he was shacking up with one of his kids in his youth group. How could he do that? Because he was so fragmented in his thinking, so compartmentalized in his thinking, that this biblical concept of truth was, for his youth group, was here, but there was no connection, there was no linkage to his personal behavior with this girl. Okay? And this young woman said to me, Pastor Don, I have to admit, there was no connection in my life between my spirituality, my worship of Jesus, and where I was living in the normal daily run of my life. Let me illustrate it in a make-believe situation. You have a person who's a Christian. They go to church on Sunday, they hear the message, they say amen, they put things in the offering, they love Jesus, they burn candles, so to speak, that's an analogy for Jesus. They are trying to witness, they really believe that God's the true way, they're born again, they're redeemed people. Then they go to the campus on Monday morning and they enter the secular world. And the secular world now is separate from the spiritual world on Sunday. And I was teaching some of these things, and a man who I very much loved and respected, the Lord's taken him home, extremely intelligent man, very intelligent, had invented things or was over Dow Chemical, where he led that thing on things like saran wrap and things like that, and napalm and all kinds of things that DuPont made, or Dow Chemical, excuse me, made. Very intelligent. He's a chemist. He was a chemist. And he said to me, Don, he said, you have to understand, he said, I grew up in a time when Sunday was religious and Monday through Friday was secular. So he would go into the secular arena for 5 to 6 days, and his lifestyle was totally different. He didn't teach, he didn't preach, he didn't share the gospel, he didn't witness, because that was Sunday. That was the spiritual part of his life. He was an elder in his church. He was on the session in the Presbyterian Church. His life was so fragmented that he lived a certain way here, but he didn't live that way on Sunday. Almost like taking off your pants and coat and tie and shirt and shoes and putting on a completely different outfit. And this young woman said, now I'm realizing that there is a unity to my life. And the way I live on Sunday is the way I ought to live on Monday. And actually, Paul says the whole week is a week of Sabbaths, isn't it? That's what God wants from us. He doesn't want roller coaster experiences for us. High point on Sunday, then we go back to the dark, dirty old world, and we live in context of that. We have to live in that, but he wants us to be consistent in our lives. This unity that I'm talking about, this unity of thought, the cohesiveness. There was a time in our Christian academy when there was an insurrection and we had a real big problem. It was over sex education, and I stumbled across one day something that was being taught in our Christian academy to 4th and 5th graders, and my assistant pastor, I didn't know what was happening, my assistant pastor brought it to my attention, and we looked at it, and he thought, you know, he's wondering, what do we do? And I made a quick decision, well, we're not going to do this until it's reviewed. So I pulled the plug on that program. They were supposed to start it that afternoon. I didn't know they had done the same thing same program 2 years before. I was unaware of that. That's perhaps my remission, my problem. And so I pulled the plug, and it just would have been, it was like I just pulled a life plug on somebody's ventilator. And the teachers just went off the wall. I think they went off the wall in part because my questioning their use of that material, explicit material to 4th and 5th graders, was indicting because they had already done it 2 years before. And I didn't say it was wrong, I just said, no, we're not going to do this under my watch until the elders and the church council has time to review this if it's appropriate. And we did that, and the unanimity of the church council was, no, this is not appropriate. Well, there's a slang term I daren't use, but everything broke loose. And all of a sudden, I was in deep trouble with the teachers. There was open rebellion. I mean, it was a mess. And there was a meeting that I held with the parents, trying to explain to them what we were doing and why we were doing it. So the parents show up. We held it at a neutral place. In those days, we had almost 100 kids, at different times, 80, 60, 100 kids in the Christian academy. So it was a pretty big school. It was the only school in town, the only alternative school that I was aware of in town. And a man from the back of the room, because I was trying to show how biblical principles now are applied in these different aspects, different areas. And the man in the back of the room, one of the parents there, said, and he was showing this as a problem. He was attacking me. He was not making a positive statement, he was making a very negative statement. He looked at me and said in front of everybody, I'm standing up front, he says something like, the problem with you is everything is spiritual. Well, I didn't take that as a negative, I took that as a compliment. He was accurately understanding my worldview. That everything we do in our Christian school ought to be based on a biblical principle. And if it's not, how can you claim it to be a biblical school? The discipline needs to be principled on biblical principles. And I was running into those constantly with our teachers. And now it blew up with this particular thing on sexuality. Because I didn't think what they were doing was appropriate for that age and for a mixed audience of 4th and 5th grade girls and boys. And I had already run into it a number of times, so that my track record was there. And some of this I share with you now because this is a practical way that in polemics and apologetics that we have to deal with the life around us. And I'm not always right, and I've made mistakes along the way, but my goal is to take everything back, all thoughts captive to Christ, and make sure it's biblical principle involved. So one time, I don't know if I told you the story, one time we had, the kids were throwing snowballs, and kids can get hurt throwing snowballs, and So the principal made a rule that if you threw a snowball and got caught, you could be expelled from school for 3 days. 3-day expulsion for throwing a snowball. So a kid was caught throwing a snowball, so they threw him out of the school for 3 days. And another little boy, out of guilt, comes and says to the principal, I threw a snowball too. So then the principal said, okay, you're expelled for 3 days also. You with me? Is that how you would handle that? Why not?
Because he confessed.
Pardon?
Because he was remorseful and showing repentance.
Think it through. Is that how you would handle that? We know that there are consequences to sin, even if we ask Jesus for forgiveness. We know sometimes, in some occasions, he actually removes the consequence also, doesn't he? There's not a promise, I don't believe in God's word, to remove the consequence. So if you get a girl pregnant, you might get her pregnant, she has a baby, and God will forgive you and forgive her, but the baby doesn't go poof when forgiveness comes, does it? You don't drag it off the screen like in a Macintosh out of your dock and it goes poof in a little cloud. The baby remains. Okay? Sometimes he does remove the consequence of our sin, but he does forgive. Now, what is the difference of catching someone doing something wrong and then he has to pay the consequence of it, or someone coming in personally self-confessing it? In a spiritual sense, God disciplines those he loves because he brings us to conviction and then disciplines us to turn us around. Is that not true? What if we come to him on our own and confess our hearts before him? Then would there still be need for discipline? Is discipline still necessary? I propose to you not the same way. And I looked at the principal and I said, aren't you trying to teach children to bring their hearts to Jesus and admit when they do something wrong and receive his forgiveness? Yes, you are trying to teach people to do that. And so I believe that there should have been a different penalty for his disobedience, so that he could understand that it's not exactly the same when you confess your heart to the Lord Jesus. There is no reason for God to discipline me if I come and confess something to him. Paul talks about that in the New Testament. We bring our hearts to him. There's no condemnation to us. We can receive his forgiveness. The penalty has already been paid by Christ. That's why it's justifiable to do that. Questions, Steve?
Oh yeah, that just reminded me of the prodigal son, where like, what was it, like he left everything that he had, and then like he came back and his father came and ran and hugged him, and like he wasn't like disciplined, like he wasn't, what was it?
Stress test.
Yeah, like he wasn't chastised, he was accepted back. And that's just what it was.
The purpose of discipline is to show someone the consequence of what they're doing wrong. If someone already identifies that this is a consequence and I did it, and we bring it to God and he forgives us, then the question is, I raise that question for you, is it then the automatic thing to bring discipline to show them what the consequence is? And I suggest not. Let me ask you an inverse question. How many of you would admit to me today that God has dealt with you totally righteously for everything you've done wrong? Now wait, what I mean by righteously is, he has made you pay the price for everything you've done wrong. Isn't that interesting? Or we'd all be little piles of Electro Crisp sitting on our chairs, wouldn't we? You see what I'm saying? That's called grace. That's called mercy. That's called forgiveness. So when I ran into these issues, and then I would raise a biblical standard and say, I don't believe that's how to handle this, then I would constantly run into problem on that. Because people live in a fragmented world, and this is how you handle it in church, but this is how you handle it in the world. And when we finally ran into the the thing that tore our church and brought disunity to our church, and a church split about, I don't know how long it's been now, 14 years. What shocked me was, in dealing with the people that were going through it with me, was statements that were made that just absolutely took my breath. And I already shared one of those. So I was sitting with a man who was a graduate of Bob Jones University. He had a lot of expertise, extremely intelligent man. I shared from the scriptures how I thought we should handle this biblically for 2 hours. And he looked at me, stood up, and we were sitting at the table, and then he eventually stood up and we parted company. And he said, yes, that's what the Bible teaches, but there are other ways to do it too. Analyze that real quick in your head.
Not using the Bible as your highest authority.
The Bible wasn't the ultimate authority. You see, he worked in a secular job. He was an educator in a high school in California, junior high school in California. You don't know who he is, so don't even try and figure that out. But so he worked in a secular environment. One of the other men that was involved in that mess worked with the secular government. He was a facilitator. I saw it all the time in his dealings with us. He was a facilitator. Well, some of that facilitation stuff goes to dialectical thinking, and you bring people together, you know, like Obama. He's a group facilitator in Chicago. And what do you do in a facilitation? You take a little of your view and a little of your view, and you get people to compromise, to come together so we can get something done. That is very common in the government. It's very common in politics. It's why there's a big argument right now over Ted Cruz and Trump. Are you with me? You catching this, Sarah? I know Sarah's with me on this. Well, is that how you govern a church? You facilitate. I propose to you no. Because the old dialectic thinking was you take a little of the thesis and a little of the antithesis and you wind up with what? Come on, you all know this from logic, don't you? You wind up with a synthesis. You have to learn to compromise. Well, in theology, how are you going to compromise Christ? How are you going to compromise a biblical principle? God says, don't do this. Do you understand that this is happening to us? And this is what we're dealing with in apologetics. So God says, no sex outside of marriage, period. Our culture is saying the whole taboo is crazy. It's best to just get rid of the taboo and you can do anything you want, with anyone you want, at any time you want. And now the Christian trying to interact and be sensible to the world says, well, let's have some common ground. So then we start defining what sex is. Thesis, an idea, a thought, the opposite, antithesis, and then to get along, how are we going to get along? We compromise, so we have a synthesis. And that kind of thinking is foreign to the text of God's Word. God doesn't, can you see us sitting and trying to synthesize God and Satan? Trying to bring them together in the middle? But that is lukewarm. That's exactly why Jesus said, that's vomit to me. Jesus is extremely exclusive. God is extremely exclusive. There is only one of Him. And there is no one like Him. And everything that goes in opposition to His nature and character is in opposition to His nature and character. Now, do you believe that? That's the world we're trying to reach for Christ. And it is a challenge, but there are these crossing points. And I know I'm pontificating there. But I want you to try and grasp these particular issues. And in counseling, that's one of the bases of new aesthetic counseling. If you're really going to help someone, you start with and you make sure you're within the context of the biblical framework. So when this man said to me at that meeting, Pastor Don, your problem is everything is spiritual. And he thought he was proving a point and condemning me. And I thought, thank you. Thank you, I appreciate that. And I think that probably shocked everyone. You're absolutely right. There is always a spiritual part of the framework. How you raise children, how you discipline children, how you educate children, all has to go back to God. Okay? And it's from God that everything flows. And then it's distorted and messed up. Now, do you think this way? Did you think this way when you came? I hope so. Are you thinking more this way now than you ever did before? Wonderful. Did you come this way not thinking this way, come to this place not thinking this way, and now we've tweaked you and antagonized your mind enough to say, maybe my world is fragmented. Maybe I can honestly, and they can, because there's no tension, because postmodernism does it. They can actually go to church and worship Jesus and praise His name and lift His name up and feel good, warm fuzzies and honest dedication to Jesus. And then leave church and Sunday night go to a movie which is going to portray and show something totally opposite the gospel. And there's no tension. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. Let's get back to this. My goodness. Preaching is a... Let me read this passage again. And he says this, he must have been speaking to pastors here at a conference or something. But I don't think this is just for pastors, friends. If you're going to be an apologist, this is for all of us. Ready? I'm going to read this for you. Please pay attention. The lack of the task of the preacher is undoubtedly one of the most difficult roles in a fragmented society, steeped in such scorching secularism. Many people in the pew see Christianity as disjointed from their day-to-day life. It's not connected. They see it as one aspect of their lives, something they do in addition to everything else. Nothing is connected for them in life. There is no unity in the diversity of roles we all play. So they believe God is the creator on Sunday, and they believe evolution in the high school and in the college classroom on Monday. Preaching is such a sacred trust. Over the years I have learned to respect the calling more each day. I hesitate therefore to give anyone else suggestions. What has helped me in making the connection is to see a sermon as incorporating three components. And now here's for you guys in homiletics class. I need to evaluate this. I'm not sure it's exactly right here, but I wanted you to read this. The scriptures provide the truth. The arts, poetry, literature, and other current events provide the illustrations, and the applications should go right to daily living. This approach helps connect ideas with concrete reality. One of the important roles of the preacher is to be a connector. People today live life in various privatized struggles. There is no unity to them. The pastor is the only person who can help them make sense of it all. Why does he say that? Because you can only make sense of a unity in your life from a spiritual base. But for a pastor to connect fragmented lives takes hard work. Most professions afford the luxury of one line of thinking. The eye doctor. If I'm a biology teacher, for example, biology is my discipline and all I need to keep up with. If I'm a hockey player, hockey is all I need to perfect. But a pastor, or a Christian teacher, or, parentheses, an up-to-speed apologist, has to keep up with so many fields because the audience is so diversified. And the pastor is looked up to for wisdom in trying to connect it all. Now, let me stop here and give you an opposite opinion. He's implying that the pastor needs to step with a lot of different fields to help connect to people, not to look ignorant to them, he's going to say that, so that he can help connect the dots. I think there's an even easier system than trying to understand all the isms, and that is to understand the baseism, the original ism. That's what we've been doing with you this year. Back to Babel, back to Lucifer, so that you always understand the framework. While everything's disconnected and dysfunctional, all of the isms connect to the original. Okay? He's going to make a statement next week in opposition to what I just said to you there, and I disagree with him. That's why I think our class is so special. Because we're offering a little different approach, maybe a big different approach, You don't have to understand the details of all the isms. If you understand the first ism from Satan, and all the rest flow from that, you're going to have some common understanding to help meet people's needs. Do you understand what I'm saying? You may disagree with me, but do you understand what I'm trying to get at? A.W. Tozer said that we are all ignorant only in different subjects. Some pastors might not be given to philosophical thinking, but all of us wrestle with these issues at some level. We need to rise to the level we can. In the previous paragraph, is a tall order with knowledge growing exponentially. J. Kirk, it's easy to wind up sounding ignorant. See, if you pinned me to the wall, if you were a follower of Jacques Derrida, you could probably make me look silly in 5 minutes because I don't know all the details of deconstructionism. But there would be part of our conversation where I could go back to the very beginning and show you the rebelliousness against the unity of the Godhead. And all of a sudden I'm talking at the very core of their mistake. You with me? You got it, Stephen? Oh, I get excited about this. Because then any believer can be an apologist. Okay? I recommend that pastors formulate a book list representing 5 of the major worldviews. Take 3 or 5 cards and write down the fundamental beliefs of each. What are the basic doctrines of worldview? Who are the leading thinkers advocating it? Preachers must work hard at being familiar with the leading thinkers of our day, the ideas of Jacques Derrida and Paul de Man. For example, give first-hand insight into deconstruction, a worldview that trumpets the meaninglessness of meaning. The reading is difficult, but you'll get the feel for our times. If one is not given to this type of content, then it still is important that we know where to direct the inquiry's struggles. Now, I agree with them that it's wise and good for us to know something about these, but not to be an expert in them, because you're looking at minutiae and missing the bigger picture. And I think it's smarter and wiser to go back and format the disc with the primary concept from the beginning. Then you're all ready. Okay? Let's finish up with this statement and we'll go to some video here. Yes, in all arenas, we see this potential, political, business, academic, and the arts. We do our universities a disservice when we brand them as a lost cause. There are some frightfully honest students out there. And when our questions, why? Because God's Spirit is doing what? What do we believe biblically? A person can't come in the Spirit unless the Spirit of God draws them, right? Agree? Amen? Well, is the Spirit still in the business of drawing men to Christ? So we can assume what? There are people out there on their way to becoming godly, becoming Christians. Let me pause on this for a minute. I don't know if I did this for you in the fall. Tell me if I did, and I'll back up and go quicker. We see evangelism, we're sharing the gospel, as they're all lost. Here's this big group of people lost, made up of individuals. Here's a group of people, and I'm going to take the gospel to them. So most of evangelism in the last 50 years has been group evangelism. Not all of it, but a lot of it. We, especially in the 1940s and the 1950s and the early 1960s, the church relied on crusades, revivals, Billy Graham, big meetings. You get them all to come. We used to do it here in Jackson. We got the town high school athletic field, and we had evangelists come, and we got people to come from different churches in all walks of life, and then they presented the gospel. Now think about this. The main motive, the main method of trying to present the gospel was to groups, to the group. Now that's changing, hasn't it? Why? Because there's been a re-emphasis of what? One-on-one. You taking the gospel to people in the world in which you live. Street evangelism is still what? Which idea?
One-on-one.
Street evangelism. What I'm talking about, where you open air, like open air campaigns, you set up a soapbox and you go out and you preach the gospel to whoever listens. Paul the Apostle used that format, didn't he? Not all the time. There's nothing sinful about it, nothing wrong with it. But you understand in the United States that was the main method of sharing the gospel, was holding a crusade. How many of your churches used to have a crusade once a year at a revival meetings? Well, see, this is disappearing. When I grew up, every year our church had a revival meeting. The purpose was to get people saved, so you were supposed to bring unsaved people. Tell me what happened, almost always what happened in those meetings. It was to last a whole week long, so it was hit on Sunday, a preacher told you to start bringing your friends, so the gospel was going to be presented. See, it's a group approach. There's nothing wrong with it, but now think about that. That was almost all the church ever, in those days, that was the main way. I don't believe it was the main way people were finding Christ. Because God's plan is one-on-one in the Scripture, I think. So what almost always happened is a sub-bunny trail.
No discipleship.
Pardon?
No discipleship.
And first Monday night came, and who showed up?
Unsaved people?
Pardon?
Unsaved people?
Did they? Did the people really go out and bring their unsaved friends? No. So who showed up Monday? Christians that were there Sunday. Tuesday night, go out and bring your friends tomorrow night. Tuesday night comes, who shows up?
Christians.
Here a straggler, unsaved person, here a straggler, unsaved person, but who showed up? The same group. Wednesday. So guess what they almost, and this is so classic. This is so classic. So midweek, the whole revival meeting, the whole evangelism thing changes into a revival meeting to revive the saints because they should be bringing unsaved people. And they put a guilt trip on them for not bringing unsaved people, and then they feel guilty, and then they get right with God, and the week ends in a success because everybody felt guilty and confessed their sin that they weren't reaching out to people. I'm sorry if I sound sarcastic. That happened countless times, well, not countless, that would be infinite, numerous times in the United States. Every year, a revival meeting. And you saw after a while, you dreaded it. Because you knew what was going to happen. You were going to get this guilt trip for not bringing people to church so they could hear the gospel. Where in the Bible do you got to bring people to church to hear the gospel? Okay? Yeah, you see, this is really deep in my soul. And so we've shifted. Rightfully so, we've shifted. And so along came programs like James Kennedy and others who developed programs to train people to go live their Christianity right in the real world. But see, in a fragmented world, that's difficult. So we Christians need to talk to ourselves and have a unification in our lives. So he says there are people, oh, I know what I wanted to mention here. I was going somewhere with that. If I pressed you with the old style evangelism, I can make you feel guilty that you're not going out to a lost world. Why aren't you going to town this afternoon and share the word? Why aren't you going to, when you go to school, why aren't you just constantly preaching the Bible to people and getting your soapbox and telling them they're going to hell and they need to find Jesus? And make you feel guilty for that. Okay? Let me give you a different approach. Answer my questions out loud. Ready? Do you believe a person has to be worked on by the Spirit of God in a drawing process, a quickening process to bring them to Christ?
Yes.
Do you believe He's still in the business of doing that?
Yes.
Do you believe in the world in which you live? Maybe not so much here because you're so secluded. This is sort of encapsulated here, isn't it? Eric Hovind helped you, didn't he, to break us out for a little bit. That was really healthy. Do you believe when you get back home, work this summer, and wherever you're going to go work? One of you told me you're going to go back to school. Kelly, I guess, is going to go to school, and your local, right, your community college. Do you think it's possible that in that arena there are already lives that the Spirit of God is drawing? Do you think it's possible? Then get rid of all the stigma and the fear of you having to get on a soapbox. All you have to do is pray that the Lord will do what? Cross your path with one of those who are already searching. And it is not scary to answer a question for somebody who's wanting it, is it? Are you with me? Do you understand how neat this is? That's what he's saying here. Our colleges and universities are full of people who are desperately searching. Then where's the embarrassment? And I don't know if I can talk about Jesus on this soapbox. I'm not saying soapbox is wrong, but I'm drawing a conclusion here that if I pray, Lord, cross our path. And Bev and I, when we travel, we have been practicing this and just enjoy it. And you know how we do it? We stop and talk. Meet people in a restaurant. Hi, how you doing? It happens all the time, especially in motels that have you know, they provide breakfast. Most of the motels now provide breakfast. So you sit down and you start talking, and sometimes the tables are full, so you have to sit with somebody else. And or somebody will pray, and we'll go over and say, we noticed you said grace, we do too. Or they'll see us praying, and somebody will come and say, we noticed you said grace. Or we're simply sitting with someone. We were in one recently, and there was all these tables, and everything was always just one couple. Well, Beverly, you know, Beverly, she'll go start talking. Well, where are you from? Well, where are you guys from? Well, we're from Wyoming. Oh, Jackson Hole, wow, we were there one time, and we want to go there. Well, what brings you back here? Well, we're just with the answers in Genesis, and we're building the ark. Wow, you're kidding me. Oh, my goodness. And what does that mean? And well, you know, that God's word is true, and they show interest, and all of a sudden we're in this conversation. Maybe with somebody God is already working on. So why would I get scared about that? I don't have to make them do anything. I don't have to get them to believe anything. I don't have to convince them of anything. They're already on the road to, they're hungry. And if somebody was in the desert and dying of thirst, how embarrassing would it be to hand them a glass of water? Do you think it would be embarrassing? No, it's a joy. Right? The airplane's going down. Okay, now imagine this, you're on an airplane, 747, and there's 200 people on the plane, and now watch this analogy, and you're out there trying to share the gospel, apologetically. Now you can get in conversation, because apologetic conversations, what you're doing is, in a sense, what you're really doing is, what are you looking for? You're looking to see if, come on, help me. Is this so simple, I'm just boring you, or is this, you're not catching this? When you start sharing your faith, what are you really doing? You're sending out some bread on the water to see if there's any hunger. If there's hunger, what do? You keep going, right? So you're in a 747 and it's flying fine. Okay, and they tell you about the thing that'll drop out of the ceiling, you know, if there's a crash or an accident. But do you start handing out life preservers? Do you wear a life preserver when you're on a 747? When do you get the life preserver out? When there's a crisis. Now, if the pilot said, we're going to have to ditch in the lake, do you think now it's embarrassing to get out the life preservers? You would look silly sitting there with your life preserver on, nobody else sitting and everybody's reading a book or watching a movie. They'd think you're a kook, wouldn't they? But what if the plane starts going down? All of a sudden, the life preserver is what? It's in vogue. You see what I'm saying? So you start sharing your faith. You start sharing something else that has to do with your faith. I use the Ancient Man book all the time. Or Answers Magazine. Well, we're going back because I'm on the board of this ministry and we're building a creation museum. Really? Creation? Yeah. We just believe the Bible's true, and we're trying to show people that it's authentic, and that we're trying to answer questions about Noah's flood, that it really, really took place. The Word of God is true. Oh, really? Yeah. And we really believe that men need Christ, and we have found Him. And all of a sudden you realize you're witnessing, and you don't realize you're witnessing, and you don't realize you're witnessing, because it's a part of a normal conversation. And if they're hungry, I go into this big tower. I think this is relevant. I don't think I'm wasting your time. My approach to things may be a little different, but I think it's biblical. Instead of the big group, we're going to throw a crusade. I want you to go out and get your unsaved friends and bring them. So you walk up to your unsaved friend and says, we're having a revival at our church. How would they react? Well, what's that about? Well, we are going to try and get you saved. Oh, I think I'm busy on Monday night. It had some downsides to it. So I go into this tower in Branson, and it's a big tower. You look over the whole area, and it's right on the edge of where I told you about the book, Shepherd of the Hills, where the pastor who wrote that book, that was the setting. And so here's the guy inside. I figured he was some old guy who was just a volunteer to sell books in this little bookstore, and you pay $8 and go up to the tower. So we start talking to him. Oh, really? And told him why we were there, and the books, and the answers in Genesis, and and you're involved with something, you have books, you have things to introduce things. And so he starts showing interest. There wasn't anybody around. We weren't taking time from him. There was nothing else for him to do. I wasn't annoying him. If he had a long line of people, now people behind you get mad. There was nobody there. Actually, some other couple was going through, some other young people, and they stood there listening, somewhat fascinated. You know how it started? Well, oh yeah, the book Shepherd of the Hills. I just love that book. And yeah, I know it took place here, and it's a really special book, and it had some neat stuff in it. And so now I'm, connecting to his world. And 2.5 hours. I go up to the car and bring in books for him, give them to him. His soul's worth $16 or $20 in cost. And he says, "Oh, I'm going to read this." And then one of his workers came up, and she's listening, and I looked at her and says, "Maybe you can share this." "Oh yeah, when he's done, I want to look at that." Well, the gospel's in that book. Then he tells me what he does. He is the director of the play they do every summer, and they stopped it for 1 year, and now they started up again for popular demand. And it's a 2,000-seat auditorium, and they do the play of the Shepherd of the Hills, and he's the director of it. Then he looks at me and says, "My mother was religious." And he says, I'm still searching. And I said, "That's great. Wow. Yeah, my mother was religious." And so now all of a sudden there's Velcro sticking fast. That wasn't, "I got to witness to somebody today. I'm nervous about they're going to ruin my day. Let's do it quick to get it past." All of a sudden, wow, that was fun. That really was fun. I enjoyed that. He enjoyed that. Where to find Jesus? It's up to the Spirit of God. Maybe I was just part of that. And are you with me? Do you like this approach? Do you believe there's people back where you come from on the farm that God is already working on their hearts and they're getting desperate to find the answers they're looking for? Then what you're doing is you're handing a life preserver to someone on a plane that's ready to crash, and they aren't going to look at you like you're some kind of a jerk. They're going to say, "How do I put this thing on?" Okay. I like this statement. We see the evil world around us as adversarial. They're all lost and they all hate God and they all want to get rid of God. Well, that's true in a sense, but there are those that God is what? Working on. Every generation will try to get us to change the message, but wisdom is justified by our children. We are all called to be faithful to our calling in the Word, and God has promised to honor those who honor Him. If our preaching leads people to genuine worship, we will help meet the deepest longing of the heart and mind. The secular worldviews have left them bankrupt. I love Ravi. I wish I personally could convince him of a young earth, because I think he's just not going back far enough in his logic to make it consistent. But that's my opinion, as you know. But I do love his work, and I love what he's saying here. Here's one of the greatest intellectual thinkers of our time. Sort of a Jason Lyle type, right? But what's his emphasis? Compassion, holy walk yourself, okay? Trust in the Spirit of God. He's already working on their hearts. So how many, if you didn't read this yet, it's part of your reading, and I think it's extremely valuable. I've got some more today that's coming to you. Okay. I know we have a lot of ground to cover, and in some way, there's always that pressure to apologize. We got to get back to our format, and we got all the syllabus to do. But if I look back on early education in the church, Gamaliel, for example, or the early days, even just 100, 200 years ago, there would have been those times in the classroom where there was ample opportunity to effectually make things practical and applicable in our lives. I happen to think that that's some of the best education that can take place. So we haven't wasted any of our time. At least I don't think we have. Okay? I want you to go home and live for Jesus. You have much. Those who have much is required of you. But you're not going to go home and try and dissect everybody and then just by using technique going to save them. God's already the one working on that. But now we're helping you with information so that you can be the sharpest tool possible. You can cut butter, okay, with a baseball bat. It makes a mess, but you can cut butter. It's better to cut it with the sharpest tool possible. That's our responsibility, right? Study to show ourselves approved. Let me do one more. Are you okay? And I'll give you a break in 5 minutes. Okay. If we don't get done today, we have Monday. I was actually going to, well, I still may do something unique this morning, try something different. Let me show you this on the screen. Did I already have this up on the screen? And you've been not paying attention to me because you've all been doing this? I apologize. This was supposed to be on the screen. Okay? P-O-N. Only going to do one here. P-O-N. The principle of non-contradiction. What did Jason say last night? Why is this a real, honest law? He called it a law. I call it a principle. A law is more, wow, it's in stone. This is true. This was in stone. Why? Because God is the only God there is. He's immutable and doesn't change. Same yesterday, today, forever. So He's absolute. God is absolute. So, therefore, there is the law of non-contradiction. Something cannot be both true and false at the same time and in the same sense. And people will argue, and you'll sense they're not following sequence, they're not following the law of non-contradiction, they're making contradictory statements. This is why the accusation people use on us that the Bible contains contradictions, which is silly because they're trying to show our faith is wrong because the Bible contains contradictions, and they're trying to use that to disprove God, when in reality they have contradictions also. You can't live with contradictions. You can in a postmodern mindset where you can live in two different worlds. You can't in the physical world. You can in the physical world. You can go out this afternoon and take some paper mache and some little strips of wood and make yourself some wings and jump off the roof. Can you do that? Well, where are you going to go? Down. Your wings are going to have to conform to the world that, remember the airplane illustration from Schaefer? It's got to conform to the real world in order to fly. Okay. A couple more details. A cannot be A and non-A at the same time and in the same sense or relationship. And the verse here is 1 John. He gave us some idea of scriptures last night, but here's the one that I would like to give you here at this point. 1 John chapter 2 and verse 22. 1 John chapter 2 and verse 22. Who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, and the one who denies the Father and the Son. The whole concept of the Antichrist is law of non-contradiction. There's God, and you can't be God and non-God at the same time. So everything that is opposed to God is Antichrist. All right? The law of non-contradiction is assumed in this verse. The Trinity does not violate this law. I threw this in for my students in the past to get you to think. The law of the Trinity, well, the Trinity is you can't be one and yet three at the same time. That breaches the law of non-contradiction. Does not violate this law because it is a paradox. In other words, there are two truths equally true within the Godhead. The original word antinomy is used to mean contradiction, but now is used as the word paradox. And we understand that in the Godhead, there is only one God and three persons, but each three persons are the same essence. So the Godhead is not violated. The unity of the Godhead is not violated because each of them are the same essence. They are all God. Okay? So we'll just do that one. Law of non-contradiction. Now, Rabbi, he was raised in India in a whole culture that believed in and both. And our culture today, postmodern thinking, winds up being and both. Your view and my view, even though they're totally opposite. You think God is this, I think God is this. They're in opposition to each other, but it's okay for you to believe that because it's truth to you. It's okay for me to believe this. So our culture has become Eastern religion. We are both and. I'm not sure the Beatles went after the gurus of India and then learned this from them and sang it. I think they already were postmodernized and then found it to be like-minded, and that's why they went to who was it, Masharishi or whoever his name was, he's sort of the guy, his brother-in-law was Mitsubishi, I don't know. Okay. Let's take a 10-minute break. Good. Oh, I need my hearing aids.
What do you do in the next session?
Am I loud this morning?
Broken.
When I don't have my hearing aids, then I really get loud. Some guy on the phone yesterday said, I can't hear you very well. So for the whole rest of the conversation, I actually yelled at him.
Oh.
I yelled at him. Okay, here's what I need. So then I got on the phone, called somebody else, and I realized they're doing the same thing. I said, am I yelling at you? He said, no, I can hear you okay.
Pastor Don, are we
What?
doing the Schaefer video?
Yeah, get the same one we saw yesterday, but I may make a shift then to number 3. We'll see how far we get.